First of all, let me just say welcome, Anthony. And if you don't mind, can you just kind of remind folks that aren't familiar with your work a little bit about your background, who you are, what you do, type of thing?
Oh yeah, yeah. So, scientist at Mayo Clinic in Minnesota, Rochester, Minnesota. Uh, Biochemistry PhD from Boston University Med School. So day to day, I work in the lab, except when it's shut down with COVID. They actually converted my lab research area into a COVID unit, and then they cut my paycheck and everybody else's paycheck at Mayo Clinic because there's so few patients. Nobody's showing up for COVID. But but I'm still not even in my lab right now, which is silly. But generally, I work with stem cells and infrared light, and I also do some stuff with heart cells, rat heart cells. We take out the hearts out of rats, and I've been doing some interesting experiments there. We also work with asthma and lungs, just a lot of different things. In the past, mostly I've been focused on hormones and cholesterol. So just a whole array of things. That's why I got a biochemistry degree, because it's such a broad field.
Yeah, it's interesting about I think there's a lot of hospitals that are in that same situation where they've shut everything down and then are furloughing medical personnel, and most people aren't getting paid because there's just no business. I mean, there's just, the COVID stuff didn't show up in certain places, obviously New York and other places. It's, they're busy, but many of these other hospitals are just sitting there, it's crickets chirping, and so it's kind
Oh
of
yeah.
one of those things where, is there a more nuanced response that might be better? Let's talk about, let's talk about whatever you want to talk about, but I've just got some questions. Just one thing, I know you had talked about doing some case reports. Are you still looking at doing case reports on people on, carnivorous diets? And I know I've sent you a few people your way. I don't know if that's
Right.
going to come
Yeah,
to
that's pretty good.
fruition or not.
Yeah, so I was telling you, I get invites all the time on my Mayo Clinic email address to write case reports and write for this journal and that journal, and they fast track those to get them published, which is useful. So, and then obviously you're posting really interesting stories from people that are on real strict carnivore diets that have amazing transformations. And in particular, I'm interested in a lot of that, but the most interesting thing to me is when people have high iron and then they eat more meat and they go carnivore and then their iron lowers, their ferritin and all that. And that's really against the common, conventional thinking. And that's why I think it should be published. It needs to be out there because so many people think eating meat is what's causing, increased iron. And in reality, it's probably a number of things, but it's probably more leaky gut and just, crappy, sugar and all kinds of inflammation in the gut and a lot of other dysregulated, health issues with their metabolism. But anyways, so you've sent me a few people with that. I haven't gotten, to the point where we found a few people that are willing to share their data and all this, but it wasn't like super striking. It was definitely an improvement, but it's hard because, I basically I need people to sign some forms that allow me to use their data, and that's been a little tricky. And then also I need like some past history that's really clear, and then a shift in their diet that's really clear. But yeah, I'm working on it. I'm definitely willing, especially like I say, especially in the irons category. And I know initially I didn't communicate the iron component enough specifically to you, and then you had sent me some people with really interesting transformations, but it wasn't specific to iron. And again, I'm more interested in disrupting that dogma in the medical space more than anything else. And then I did the telomere. I was working on that telomere study too. I don't know if you remember that one.
Yeah, I do. What eventuated out of that?
Yeah, so I pulled together. It was cool because I did a little social media thing, and it collected a bunch of people that were willing to try the carnivore diet. The thing is almost everybody that emailed me, they were already in the carnivore diet and they've gone, they've done the carnivore diet, had great experience with it. But I was looking for people that were basically standard American, and then they were willing to do the carnivore diet for 90 days. We talked about this, settled on 90 days, and have before and after telomere testing, and preferably even before and after blood testing. And then I published things because there's a ton of evidence that shows if you eat more meat, not processed meat, but actual whole meats like steaks and burgers and things, your telomeres, extend, which is associated with longer lifespan. You have longer telomeres. And just for the audience, telomeres are the end caps on DNA. So as you age, your DNA physically gets shorter, which is associated with decreased lifespan. So anytime you're extending your telomeres or making them longer, that's associated with lifespan extension. And that's a beneficial thing, because pretty much, chronic inflammation decreases telomeres. All this, basically any bad thing you can think of shrinks telomeres. So it's really counterintuitive for most of the medical community to say, oh, you eat lots of red meat and your telomeres actually extend. In other words, lifespan extends. And in particular, zinc seems to be really important for telomere extension based on genetics. There's a gene called MYNN. It's pronounced myoneurin. And that one in particular, zinc dependent. Presumably the zinc is having a big impact from the meat. But anyways, the problem with literally everybody, except maybe one or two people that signed up to do this standard American to carnivore transition, they all cheated. And I didn't want people cheating on their diet and eating a bunch of veggies and stuff and saying that they're carnivore and then having the results kind of wacky and I'm not being able to predict it. So I was really strict about, you can't cheat, you know what I mean? Like it's just not allowed. You're going to have to drop out of the study if you're eating avocados or whatever. And again, so from that perspective, I was really strict about it. And all those people dropped out. I didn't have that many, but the people that were super carnivore, like I say, that were really willing to help, they had already been carnivore. They're not cheating. So I feel like the disciplined people are already there, and it was like they're trying to get their wife to do it or whatever, and their wife wasn't fully on board or that sort of thing. I had a lot of that in that study. So it didn't really pan out, but I think the study itself is still a phenomenal idea. And I want to test that hypothesis to see, what's the telomere length doing. A lot of people argue about the telomere testing and how good that is. And that's because it changes a lot, right? Like you can shift your telomere length quite a bit. So there's going to be variation. I mean, if you go on Monday, you go on Friday, you test your telomeres, there's going to be variation. Doesn't mean the test is crap. It just means there's variation and you have to account for that. And that's not a big deal. So like me personally, I have 3 telomere kits and I can test my own telomeres on the same day and look at how much variation there is. And then that gives a baseline, right, of kind of how much fudge factor there is maybe within those tests. And then we can use that to say, well, there's this much fudge factor, but then if you switch to a carnivore diet, you have this much telomere extension and it's super significant. That sort of thing, right? Like the mathematics, I think, would still work out to be really powerful and meaningful, but the logistics are hard when you're working for free.
Sure. Anthony, are there any like sort of set telomere per age? I mean, can we say like the average 50-year-old has a telomere length of this relative to, is that possible just to do a survey and say these people are, you've got some strict carnivores and this is their telomere data, and how does that reflect to the standard population? Is that
Oh yeah.
worth
Yeah.
doing or looking at perhaps?
Yeah, probably. I mean, they definitely have a standard age set, and I think it's called a PE ratio or a TS ratio or something. It's some kind of ratio that they use, and it's pretty standardized. So yeah, even people that just want to test their telomeres after doing carnivore, again, hopefully doing it strict, without a lot of cheating, really.
Yeah.
I mean, that's convincing in itself, I think. The new way that's everybody's shifting towards now is this epigenetic test. There's a guy, he's actually from Minnesota. I'm blanking on his name. A lot of your audience probably would know who he is. He I can't believe I'm forgetting his name. But anyways, he developed this epigenetic test of aging, and it's actually more accurate than telomeres because it doesn't change quite so readily. It's called the clock, like he calls it the clock
Is
epigenetics.
that David Sinclair? I mean,
No.
I know he talks about that, I don't know if
Oh yeah. Right.
he may not have invented it by
He
now.
even uses the technology. Yeah, he uses this technology, but Horvath is the guy's name. Steve Horvath.
Okay.
Yeah, scientific palm rating for sure. I mean, Horvath, I think he came out of Harvard, but he came over to Minnesota. He's founding a company based on this because it's more accurate to measure aging. And when we start coming out with that, I think that's a huge opportunity for carnivores to prove whether or not their lifespan is extending based on the carnivore diet, because I'm sure it is. Like I said, if your telomeres are elongating, and they are, No strict study's been done, but there's enough evidence, I think, pointing in that direction. Um, it'll be interesting to see.
Well, I mean, certainly if you can do a survey, I mean, I'm sure there's many people that have been doing strict that would probably be happy to share their data. You know, like Brett's giving a thumbs up. He's been doing strict for 670 days or something like that now. And so,
Right, right.
so I mean, you could certainly get that survey type data done. And I know we've got a thing going with David Ludwig with Harvard, another survey thing. And so I think those things are a good start, and then the interventional stuff can kind of come after that. I think that's interesting. What are your so with the lab shutdown? Are you doing anything right now? Are you just kind of like twiddling your thumbs right now, or what's maybe
It's a good question.
I mean, I'm sure you're like reading and studying and that stuff, but are you able to
Well, yeah, I
actually
mean,
do something?
mostly I'm just writing papers to publish. The big one is this cardiology paper, like I say, which is unusual for me to write a paper specifically working with heart cells. I developed a new technique that I don't know if you're aware of Western blotting and how common Western blotting is in scientific publications to measure outputs for proteins. So like, you have DNA, this is less for you and more for your audience, but you have DNA and then that gets transcribed into RNA and that gets translated into proteins. So generally scientists, you can you can measure mRNA and it's called qPCR, and that's a good way to do screening for thousands of genes and things. But when you're looking at protein, that's the most important metric because that's the final product in your cells that's actually doing things. And virtually everybody when they're looking for protein quantities, like say you're measuring mTOR, right, with and without fasting, and you want to look at that protein mTOR. I mean, to measure the quantity of mTOR, you do a Western blot, and that's like running it out on the gel. You put an antibody in there to detect how much is in there, and you can basically take pictures and measure the pixels. And the point is, everybody uses Western blot. Problem with Western blot, if you're isolating a heart, like say I take a heart out of a rat and I do some experiments to that heart. And by the way, when people do that, one of my big problems with that is the scientists always grow the heart cells in pure sugar. It's just like buffer with sugar, glucose. And that's absurd, right? Because the primary fuel source for your heart is fat. And that's super well established. Like everybody knows this, but when they take hearts out and they do experiments on them, they put them in sugar water. Again, it's got buffer. It's a little complicated, but it's always just glucose. There's no fat in there. So that alone is ridiculous. And that's something I want to work on. But the problem is they do these experiments with the heart taken out, and then they do a Western blot to see how much protein is in there, whether it's mTOR or whatever protein, right? There's thousands of proteins. The problem with that, when you take a heart out, a lot of cells die, and then a lot of other cells are pretty dysfunctional. And what people are doing is when they're running a Western blot, all of this dysfunctional, all those dead cells, all the live cells, they're all mixed together and they're in there. So I'm developing a new technique with confocal microscopy, three-dimensional microscopy, where I can actually pick out live cells that are rod-shaped with sarcomeres that are healthy and just identify the proteins in those ones using antibodies. So I'm kind of publishing a technique paper that hopefully can apply to other fields, right? You could do it with brain cells, you could do it with kidney cells, you could do it with literally any cell, just to select out the dead cells so you're not studying dead cells. So that's what I've been actively working on, and now I'm publishing that paper. But then, of course, I'm goofing off a lot too. I'm doing some carp shooting and stuff with my bow and arrow. I like to shoot fish this time of year. And I mean, I was at the archery range yesterday, and I've got a crossbow. It's called the Raven. It's like literally 8 inches is the widest point on this crossbow. It's like this. So it goes about this wide, and then you tighten down you crank it to set it, and it's like this wide. So it looks like a gun, right? And I'm gonna try shooting my fish arrows out of the crossbow, and the guy at the archery range is like, "No, you're gonna explode your crossbow." He thinks the impact of the crossbow is so powerful it'll like blow up the bow. But I'm gonna try it anyways because I don't think it's gonna blow up. But I'm certainly gonna get my video camera on it just in case it does, because that's a really expensive mistake. But so I've been doing, a lot of different outdoorsy things like that, fishing. And I went down to Mississippi as well during the lockdown just to get the hell out of Minnesota because it was still snowing. And I was doing gigging for flounder. They have like flounder spears that you can walk around the sandbars and stick flounder at night, and just lots of stuff like that.
Yeah, flounder's pretty tasty. I've been eating a lot of that
It's
lately.
good.
So I mean,
You
it's
have?
yeah, I've eaten a ton of
Oh,
that.
it's great.
I'm
Yeah.
eating flounder and then steak pretty much most days.
That's awesome. Where are you getting the flounder? Are you buying it?
Yeah, I'm buying wild caught flounder that they have, and just, eating that, frying it
Nice.
up in a pan with a little ghee and some seasoning, and that's really,
Nice.
really a good
Well,
thing.
the redfish was shockingly good down in Mississippi. I caught a bunch of redfish, and those suckers, it literally tasted like lobster. It's like the best redfish I ever had. So
Awesome. Oh, that's really
I'm
good.
definitely going to go after those next time.
So I'm going to see if anybody has any specific questions here, but I mean, people are talking about they like carp shooting too, but let me ask you, because, one of the things that you've often talked about was estrogen
Right.
and the prevalence of estrogenizing compounds in the environment. Is that something that is uh, something we need to worry about significantly, do you think?
Oh yeah, everybody does, because even if you're eating healthy, you're eating carnivore, all that, it should be on people's radar, because it's in the personal care products. These estrogen chemicals, they clearly go through your skin. In fact, since I published my book, they came out with another study just last year on sunscreen, and they showed that, and this is all over, like you can find it on CNN and everything. One application of sunscreen, 7 days later, your blood levels of oxybenzone, which is the estrogen chemical in sunscreen, 7 days later, it was still above the government's own limits, like in people's blood. That's just one application. And then, of course, they had like the previous chair of the, these government regulatory boards, whatever, the FDA and all this. They were saying like, you know, this is crazy. We got to make tighter regs and all this. And I'm just saying, we've had this legal for how many years? Like 20, 30 years, and everybody's been using it. And they finally did a study where they actually measured how much it spikes your blood. And that's super common, right? Like there's so many of these chemicals that are acting like estrogen. And to find out exactly how much is in the blood and all that, everybody's debating about that. In my opinion, let's just get rid of those chemicals. And now with COVID, it's even more obvious that's a problem, because they're just publishing research now showing that if your testosterone is low, you're at a much higher risk. And I mean, these things lower your testosterone. They lower your free, they lower your total. They not only lower your testosterone, but they block the binding to the receptor. So even if you've got good testosterone, if you're loading up on estrogen chemicals, it's not even binding the receptor properly. So it looks good on the blood test, but it tricks you in that perspective.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize there's a receptor interaction there, just like there is with insulin, just like there is with thyroid and all those things. The receptor has to be functioning well as
Right.
well. I mean, it's kind of interesting, and many people will probably corroborate this, but I found, since I've gone on this carnivore diet, I can sit in the sun for a long time without
I've heard
sunscreen.
that.
I don't wear sunscreen anymore. I mean, I'm out there in a rowing machine rowing 20,000 meters in the middle of the midday sun, and I don't burn. I just sit there and just kind of
Right.
continually. And I know there's some concern about vitamin D. In fact, a pretty
Right.
significant correlation between vitamin
Mm-hmm.
D and susceptibility, or low vitamin D and susceptibility towards this COVID. Is one of the reasons many African Americans that live in northern climates, because their melanin blocks their ability to convert vitamin D, because they're used to so much sun at the equator. And now they don't live at the equator. They have chronically low levels of vitamin D. So
Correct. Yeah.
interestingly, yeah, we've been slathering sunscreen on our bodies for years. What about, and then, obviously now we're putting all the antiseptic hand washing gels. Do those things have issues with them as well? All the
Not if there's no fragrance. It's the fragrances that you got to watch out for, that they sneak those estrogen chemicals. But I mean, there's potential for just killing your good, healthy gut bacteria or healthy skin bacteria, of course, but it's pretty hard to prove that. Again, it's another of those things they're not really studying. So then you can't go and show a scientific study. The interesting thing about that sunscreen, I've heard that a lot from people that do the carnivore as well. And that's another indicator, just like the telomeres, right? Because if telomeres are extending, it's an indicator that your DNA is being healed properly, it's being repaired properly. And that's exactly what's probably happening with the sun damage. Your body can just heal the DNA damage faster. It's perfectly fine to get some DNA damage. I mean, as long as you heal it, and as long as it's not a double-stranded break, because you have two strands of DNA. If you just break one and heal it back up, it's no big deal. The problem is if you're hitting yourself with x-rays or something and you get some of these double-stranded breaks, then your body has trouble figuring out what was there to begin with, and it starts patching it up with random mutations and things. But I'm sure that healing is accelerated with obviously any healthy diet, but in particular carnivore, if the telomeres are extending.
Yeah, so I mean, hopefully we can get that data to you. And so I guess if people listening to this live or listening to it on the replay, if they want to, so if people, I mean, what are you looking for? I mean, if people are wanting to submit themselves to scientific rigor, I mean, what kind of things are you looking to study right now? The telomeres, iron studies, or anything else? I know I sent you a person with an interesting Ehlers-Danlos, uh, thing, which I thought was just fascinating. I think that's definitely also kind of interesting. But
Yeah. Um, anything that, like I say, that kind of goes against conventional. I mean, the problem is there's this huge machine in the vegan vegetarian community, even though it's absurdly unhealthy for most people, there's just like a massive machine pushing it. And I mean, it's crazy, right? Like there's so many doctors that are like, well, I would love to eat healthy, but I'm not committed enough to be vegan. Like that's just there. It's funny at the Mayo Clinic. I may have told you this before, Sean, but I was talking to a doctor. Now this is supposed to be world renowned, right? Everybody's all famous and all this. I was talking to a doctor in the hallway, um, and I was just mentioning the keto diet. I can't even remember how it came up, and he'd never heard of it. He'd never heard of the keto diet. Like I was like, like you go into ketosis. He'd never even heard of the concept. It was so ridiculous because these guys are trained to basically, they go with the system, go with the flow, prescribe drugs, find symptoms. They don't know anything about healing yourself from your diet, so they're being told that vegan, vegetarian is the optimal way to go about it. It's just really challenging, and it takes a lot of discipline. I mean, so that's kind of the thing you have to go up against. And so anything that counter, that basically counters that, anything that's legitimate science that counters that, I'm really interested because I think, it's super common. Like the vegan diet, like I say, it's a joke to think that that's the best thing, um, but literally anything, like I say, I'm interested in. Um, Metabolism. And the problem is, of course, a lot of people will just say it's calorie counting, right? They'll say, well, when you go carnivore, you're just cutting calories. So, of course, you're losing weight or whatever. So, the weight loss thing is tricky because, I'm not that interested in that whole can of worms because that just gets swept under the rug so quickly with the calorie counting crowd because almost nobody's counting calories. You don't have to. That's the beauty of having a good diet is you don't have to count calories, right? Because your body tells you when you're satiated, your hormones get adjusted properly. It's the other part of intermittent fasting that I really like because, and the scientific community has embraced intermittent fasting for the most part. Even the New England Journal of Medicine is publishing on how beneficial that is. So at least with that, there's not like this giant uphill battle. But just meat in general, for some reason, has gotten this weird stigma that I think needs to be overturned, frankly, because it's all just spin and just bullshit. Like the soy issue. It's crazy when I started researching soy, how many layers of like bullshit there is in terms of you know what the actual data shows and then what the scientists are saying. I know you're familiar with Michael Greger and you post on him all the time, and I love it, by the way, but like he's got this video talking about how good soy is, and he shows this paper, and he shows figure one, and it's talking about basically people's phytoestrogens in their blood, so plant estrogen, phytoestrogen, after the eating soy, it spikes up. I mean, there's no question, and everybody agrees it acts like estrogen, so that's the first thing. But there's two estrogen receptors that pick up estrogen. One's called estrogen receptor alpha, and the other one's called estrogen receptor beta. And this alpha receptor is known to be pretty problematic, right? It's the one it's supposed to be when you're a baby and you're developing. Estrogen receptor alpha is supposed to be a little activated, whatever, but then it's supposed to be shut off, and you're not really supposed to. So increases breast cancer, increases prostate cancer, increases all kinds of things, depression. So you don't want to be activating the alpha receptor. It's not the bad one because it is important during some stages of your life, but generally I would consider it the bad one if you want like an easy way to think of it, alpha bad. And then the estrogen receptor beta is protective against heart disease, protective for your brain, protective against prostate, protective against breast cancer, all kinds of problems to get protected with beta. So beta is good. So anyways, the point is Greger on this publication he's selected, he shows figure one, and it shows phytoestrogen being high in the blood after eating soy, which is everybody knows, and then it shows like the actual estrogen tested on soy estrogen tested on cells, and it shows like extreme beta activation and just a little bit of alpha activation. So he says, look at this, it's phenomenally healthy because it only activates the beta receptor. But it's so funny because I went to that paper, I'm like, oh, that's interesting, right? I'm open to the idea, let's check it out. And because, you know, like if you're activating beta, it's good to protect against prostate cancer. So if you have a risk for prostate cancer, let's use that. Or if you have a risk for breast cancer, let's use it. But then what was hilarious is figure 2 in that same paper with a different kind of cell in the same people. They just took like a different kind of skin cell or a different muscle cell or whatever. In those same people, figure 2 showed extreme alpha activation, the problem, and then a little bit of beta activation, right? So he kind of spun it out. And even the authors in that paper were like, they were saying, we don't know how to interpret this. You know, it's just obviously dependent on the person, dependent on the cells, depending on like how good your gut bacteria is breaking these chemicals down. And of course, Greger took it and just showed figure 1 and said, look at how amazing soy is, right? We should all be loading up on soy. And so that's the kind of thing you're up against when you start going into, you know, again, going up against these particular people that are obviously trying to spin the science. And I mean, he knows better without a doubt. Like, I'm sure he saw figure 2, right? Like, but there was no mention of it. And that's the thing that's really crazy when you hit these topics, is you have to suddenly try and weed through all the crap. And even the scientific publications are oftentimes skewed. So then there's that layer of problem, you know, of confusion. So I don't know, I probably went on way too long on that, but it's a good illustration, I think. And now everybody knows. One of the beauties of this COVID thing is everybody knows like how much confusion there can be within the scientific community, and how these models can be bullshit, and like how you really can't trust a model, you know, as far as you can throw it. So I mean, it's at least waking people up to some of that stuff. I mean, in Minnesota, I think they predicted 50,000 people were going to die with the lockdown, and 100,000 were if we didn't have the lockdown. And we literally got about 1,000 people that have died with the lockdown, with this extreme lockdown. And that was apparently less people have died in the last 2 months this year than like died last year in those same 2 months, you know, and except everybody lost their jobs and all this kind of thing, right? So this is models. That's what happens when you start basing all this, you know, all your conclusions on these fake models that people are generating in their, you know, like little think tanks.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard, you know, in retrospectively, people say, well, it's because we did the lockdown that there were so many deaths. So there's really no way to prove that. I mean, you know, it's
Right.
people are gonna want to cite whatever they want to cite and say this is what caused it. Well, it could be, you know, hell, I don't know, it could be the temperature. I mean, I still, it's warming up. We're seeing flattening. You know, obviously some people say, well, it's not due to the weather. It's due to our aggressive lockdown in the states that have opened up. I have not seen a resurgence in, I mean, and again, I've kind of gotten over this stuff. I just get sick of talking about it because it's so
Same.
polarizing.
Right.
It
Right.
it just pisses people off all the time. And I just kind of like, I just saw a study come out talking about, you know, glycemic control and being one of the major risk factors and
Right.
complications and outcomes. And, you know, we see no one really wants to address that issue. It's like, you know, how do you improve glycemic control? I mean, it's, you know, it's largely diet, but we God forbid we tell people to adjust their diet because we want to keep them eating the junk. What other outside of you know, skincare products, sunscreen, whatever, fragrance things, what other things are estrogenizing us that are things that we have control over that we can sort of minimize or mitigate on a relatively easily?
Right. The water is huge. I mean, people that aren't filtering their water, there's so much estrogen in the drinking water. The city doesn't claim to filter it out. They don't try and filter it out. Um, you know, they're good at killing the viruses, killing the bacteria with all these chemicals, these chlorines and whatnot, but they're not good at filtering out these estrogen chemicals that, again, they're not trying to. Bacteria is pretty big compared to one single estrogen molecule. So, you know, when you have PVC, for example, when water is running through PVC, it's picking up tons of these phthalates. And it's super well established that that's problematic if you're drinking those phthalates. Again, what they debate about is what the limits are and all this crap. But the problem is they build up in your body, they accumulate. It's called bioaccumulation. So, you know, even if you have quote unquote safe levels of these plastics in your drinking water, if you're doing it all the time, you're just building them up in your system. And again, you add on top of that, all these personal care product estrogens, all the soy estrogens, all the other estrogens, whatever, sunscreen, right? Red 40, artificial red food dye, the mold secretes estrogen. One of the reasons mold is so damn toxic is they secrete a chemical called zearalenone. It's ZEA, it's the spelling zearalenone, and sometimes that's used as abbreviation. So you get an exposure from all these different sources, and they're bioaccumulating, and then the government's saying, well, it's okay because the levels are safe, but like, who knows how much levels you really have? And then who knows how much problems you're going to have 10 years from now, as opposed to like an immediate headache or something, which you don't usually see with these estrogen mimicking chemicals, because again, your body's used to seeing estrogens. It's not astonishing for your body to have a fairly natural chemical come in. Plants make these estrogens, so we have two estrogen receptors. They're called promiscuous for a reason. It's funny because with testosterone, there's just the testosterone receptor, right? You got testosterone in your body, it binds the androgen receptor, and that's the end of it. With estrogen, there's two receptors. There's three different kinds of estrogen. In humans, it's estriol, estrone, and estradiol. And that's why scientists say these estrogen receptors are promiscuous, which is hilarious, I think, when you read that in a scientific journal. And it just means they'll bind all kinds of different stuff. That's why you don't find testosterone mimicking chemicals, right? We don't drink out of plastics and activate our testosterone receptor and get ripped, right? Which everybody would probably have a problem with if we did. But, we don't see that because the testosterone is so much more precise when it binds the receptor. So, I'm trying to think. I mean, BPA, of course, people should avoid that. People should avoid storing hot things in plastics for sure. Even cold things, there's definitely some leaching. I reached out to a company recently, one of the best companies that measures plastic chemicals in water. And I was going to do a third-party test just to show people how much BPA and phthalates and stuff is in these water bottles that you buy in like those 24 packs at the store. I was going to get a bunch of different brands, shoot them off. They wanted $300 per sample, which I was like, well, that's painful, but I'll do it, right? But then and just so people know, our natural estrogen is between about 20 and 200 nanograms per liter, 20 to 200, let's say. Men are about 20, women are also about 20, up to about 200, depending on the time of the month. It's not that different, but that's the natural range. Now for BPA, this company was willing to test BPA, and they tested it down to 10 nanograms per liter, which is good, right? Because that's a little bit below our natural level. So if you're getting exposed above that, you want to know. What was crazy was the phthalates, the best that they go, the lowest they go, was literally like 1,000,000 nanograms per liter, at least 100,000. I can't remember the exact number. It was like 500,000 or 300,000 or something. It was like ridiculously high. So in other words, they're not even testing phthalates at the physiological range, at the range that our bodies have hormones. So the point is, you can't really trust this. A lot of scientists are out there saying, oh, it's okay. Phthalates are okay. Like BPA, yeah, that's terrible, right? And it's ironic because they used to say BPA is fine, it's no big deal, it doesn't leach, because it's all linked together. They say it forms polymers and there's no free BPA. And of course, now we know that's bullshit. There is free BPA, it does leach. They used to study BPA as birth control in the 1920s before they knew it was plastic, before they knew it had polymerized. But again, there was this whole this whole thing of scientists saying it's okay, BPA doesn't leach. You're ridiculous to think BPA leaches. And now we know it's so obvious that it leaches. They've done the same thing with phthalates. They've shifted out of the BPA industry, and they either make BPS or BPF, but now most people just use phthalates. So if you look on the bottom of your plastic mayonnaise container or whatever, it'll have a number 1 in between the recycling symbols, the arrows. And that number 1 means polyethylene terephthalate. That's phthalates, right? So almost everybody's being exposed to a certain degree of phthalates. And again, scientists right now are just kind of ignoring that because they're arguing it's okay, it doesn't really leach. And then the government's setting a limit that's kind of ridiculously high in your bloodstream anyway. And again, they're building up. So I'm more careful about plastics than I used to be. And I think people should just generally avoid plastics if you can. If you can't, right? You're going to travel, you're going to have to grab a bottle of water at the airport once in a while, whatever, don't take a picture of somebody and be like, or take a picture of me and say like, oh, Anthony's drinking out of plastic, like, because I do it, right? Everybody does it. There's just certain situations where you don't have any choices. It's fine. It's just this using these plastic bottles every day at the gym, or just like over and over and over. It's just not optimal, like it's not good for your long-term health. So I avoid that.
A couple people are asking about water filtration systems for home. Is there a recommendation that's going to help filter
Yeah.
out what's appropriate? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I've got this one. It's called Purify Guru under the sink. It's pretty awesome. It's actually stainless steel. You can see it, the unit here, how bad I'm doing with this, but it's got four different units of filtration. And it's got a pump in it, so it's reverse osmosis. It actually does cotton, so it gets rid of the big particles. Then it's got what's the next chamber? Activated charcoal is the next chamber, so it removes all the estrogens. That's the key with all the filtrations. If you've got activated charcoal, you're good. But then mine has reverse osmosis, so it gets everything else, and then it has a magnesium or mineral recharger, so it puts minerals back in, and then it comes out my sink. And the coolest thing about this one, it's reverse osmosis, but it has a pump. It's the only one that has a pump. Most reverse osmosis have a big plastic tank under your sink. And so basically you end up just soaking your water in plastic again, which isn't ideal. It's still better than nothing, but it's, it's still growing. Apparently you're growing a lot of bacteria in those reverse osmosis tanks, number one. And so they're trying to develop technology with UV lights where they have UV lights in those tanks. But then of course, what's the problem with that? You're actually freeing up more estrogen from the plastic. Anytime you have UV hitting plastic, you're freeing a lot more estrogen. So I'm not a fan of that idea. Berkey is awesome. I have a Berkey as well. I just don't use it that much because I've got 4 kids, and I can't keep up with how much water they're drinking, and it's just a pain in the ass. But I did have the fluoride filters on my Berkey, so you can definitely get rid of that as well. And I'm a fan of doing that. That's totally a different can of worms, but I've done a lot of research into whether or not fluoride is optimal, and I'm not a huge fluoride fan, to be honest. Again, you're getting some from your food, so that's generally all you need. I've never had a cavity in my life, and I don't do any fluoride, so in my water or in my toothpaste. So I'm a good, model for my teeth aren't rotting out of my heads like you, right? I'm eating nothing but meat, and I'm not falling over dead. So it's a similar thing with me and the fluoride.
Yeah, Anthony, I was wondering, because you're up at Mayo, which is, up in Minnesota, so kind of one of these sort of academic pillars. Are people around you aware of what you're doing? Are they giving you any kind of pushback or anything like that from where you're at?
A little bit. I mean, one time I was working for these orthopedic surgeons and doing stem cells and stuff, and one of them was a total, just super difficult to work with. Everybody hates them. I mean, most of these guys are. I mean, you're an orthopedic surgeon, you know how it is. Most of them are jocks and this kind of stuff, and you're a good example, right? Like they're exercising, which is awesome, but then some of them take it to the extreme of they think they're way better than everybody else. And one in particular, I mean, he's trying to become the chair of the Mayo Clinic orthopedic surgery department. He's cutting everybody down on those path up there, and uh, so there was a Mayo Clinic poster at the Mayo Clinic, like in the hallway, just one of these things. And it was like a scientific poster. And it's basically said, this is really relevant because of this carnivore thing here. It said, eat less meat, or you have like meat-free Mondays or something. I can't remember what the hell it was, but it was something like eat less meat and eat more grains. And that was like the headline. And all the science was like bullshit. And it was a poster. They were basically presenting a scientific data for all the patients walking by. And I took a picture and posted it on Twitter. And just said, like, and all I said is basically, this isn't scientific at all. And it clearly isn't, right? Because if you've got celiac, this is the stupidest advice you're ever going to get, right? Let's eat more grains, let's eat less meat. So I posted it on Twitter, and this surgeon, he had me like dragged into HR. They had like him and 3 HR reps basically like sitting down trying to be intimidating about like how this doesn't represent Mayo Clinic's values and all this kind of thing. And I just kind of sat there, and it was ridiculous because I was in the middle of a rabbit surgery. I was doing surgery on a rabbit's knee with a couple other surgeons, and so like I was in the middle of really like intense work, like experiments. And, and then I had to go down to this, like all of a sudden I got notified that I have to be here immediately from this surgeon. I get a text, and these guys never text. So I go down, and it's just like, what the hell's going on? And then there's this big deal about this stupid, Twitter post, and they make me take it down. So yeah, there's a little bit of pushback. But to be honest, I don't really care that much, number one. And it's a good way to kind of find good friends, basically, is to just, put that stuff out there and just let the losers kind of sort themselves out and the winners sort themselves out, I guess. But most of the time, I just kind of stay in my own little bubble at Mayo Clinic, and then I get out and travel around and go to conferences that I want to go to anyways, and that sort of thing. I mean, I've been invited on vegan podcasts. It's really funny because when I first published my book, I accepted those invites, and literally I've had multiple times where they've uninvited me. They invited me, scheduled it, we set it all up, and then they'll uninvite me at the last second. And after I had that happen like twice, I just stopped, basically responding to those, because clearly they found out that I was anti-soy, and that's like against their agendas on those things. And all the sponsors for those podcasts are all soy-based this and soy-based that. So, there's been some stuff, but it's not as bad as you'd expect, right? Like, I don't have any, like, I guess when I had the carnivore study, the HR called me there too. And what the hell, I can't even remember what they said, but it wasn't, oh, I know what they said. They said somebody had called in and complained, and they tried to like kick it up the food chain and all this and try to get me fired. But the HR guy was just basically telling me, he's calling me to inform me that this happened. It's not that you're doing anything wrong. And that's all he said. I was like, well, cool, I'm not going to change. But that kind of stuff doesn't bother me, because I honestly, I have my own consulting company, and I make more money consulting than I do at Mayo Clinic. And I give talks for the special forces. I've done that multiple times, and all kinds of other stuff. So at the end of the day, if Mayo Clinic fires me, it doesn't bother me at all. I mean, it kind of sucks for my name and all that kind of stuff potentially, because people do come to me. I get, like yesterday, I had a consult with somebody who's literally eating a standard American diet, just eating shit. And like, I get this all the time. It's like, how did you find me? Number one, and why do you want to do a consult? Number two, and like, I get people like that, but the Mayo Clinic name really helps those people to find me. They think it's a big deal, and I think it's kind of silly, but that's just the way a lot of people think. So, and it's, it means something, right? I mean, they do amazing surgeries, and they have really good case studies when they have these rare diseases. They do a lot of good stuff. I don't want to completely cut down Mayo Clinic, but they definitely are very conventional. When you walk into the cafeteria, it's all the soda fountains and everything, and it's just it's kind of a joke, a lot of the stuff that they're doing and then they talk about how it's the #1 hospital in the country. It's rated every year after year after year, up there competing with Johns Hopkins and all this. But at the end of the day, it's still a money-making machine, and they're looking for the insurance payouts, and it's pretty conventional, prescribing drugs, all that kind of thing.
Yeah, just back to when they made you remove your Twitter post. Was that on your own personal account, or did you say
Yep.
Mayo Clinic account? I mean, your own. I mean,
No, it's my own personal. I don't have any Mayo Clinic crap like that. I stay away from, these silly mayoclinic.org stuff or whatever. Yeah, it's just Anthony GJ on Twitter.
I'm really surprised that they sort of said take down your personal account. I guess that's
Well, it's part of the training. When they do the HR training, when you first get hired here, they have like a full day, and it's like super full. They make you come in at like 7 a.m, and it's like all day long. They're just hammering away. Like, the Mayo Clinic image is super meaningful, and our employees are super awesome, and don't ever do anything that threatens the Mayo Clinic image, and this and that, like Twitter. And they go through all this stuff. And I generally don't, but when there's some bullshit science, whether it's got the Mayo name or not, like even like the soda fountains are another example, right? Like, I'm happy to go in there with a video camera and be like, look at this, people, like, here's a bunch of soda fountains. We're at this hospital that's supposedly promoting health, right? Everybody agrees that soda is terrible for your health. There's no disagreement. And yet here it is. It's like having a cigarette vending machine at the hospital. It's just as absurd in my mind, but just because there's money and there's convenience, and it goes against the flow or whatever. I mean, they, like I say, I'd be happy to post that kind of thing, whether or not they're going to tell me not to.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy how some of the censorship is playing out. If you even
It's worse, yeah, than
talk
ever.
about like this coronavirus and anything other than the World Health
Right.
Organization guidelines, you get shut down and stuff like that. Brooke is just asking about shampoos. I assume that falls in the same category as other
Oh yeah.
skincare
Yeah.
products. Is there any kind of shampoos that you could use reasonably to wash your hair? I mean,
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, most of them that you can actually read the ingredients and their natural products are good. So there's a ton of them out there. I don't even try and make an exhaustive list, but on my consulting company page, I do say like, here's what I use. I tell people here's what I use because I've found a lot of reasonably priced products that don't have estrogens. And that's a hard thing to do. You can find expensive stuff easy. You go to Whole Foods and it's all over. But to find good stuff that's inexpensive is hard. And usually, if you just go fragrance free, you're pretty safe. Like there's a company at Walmart called Jason, Jason, and the A I think has umlauts. It's got dots on top of it, or the O does something. But anyways, that company makes a fragrance-free shampoo that doesn't have any crap in it. I mean, it's got a little tiny bit of crap, but it's nothing that's really problematic, to be honest. And they also make a conditioner. There's a company called Essential Oils. EO is the brand. They make hand soap that's fragrance free. That's really good. You can buy like these giant things of it. Um, so yeah, shampoo. What's really ridiculous? Not only does a lot of it have phthalates in it, which are again these plastic chemicals. They actually put the chemical in the shampoo and mix it in there. And then the argument from the scientists, the biochemists, is that it carries the fragrance farther in the air. So they say we want to put it in reality, all they're doing is putting it in because it's a lot cheaper. It's a petroleum product, but they're telling you that it's because it carries fragrance. Um, so that's one of the problems with shampoo. The other problem, what's really crazy, is sometimes they put red food coloring in there, but a lot of times they put these sunscreen chemicals, again, oxybenzone, and then they advertise how protective their product is against the UV radiation. So they actually market it and brag about it. They're putting these estrogen chemicals and then they brag about it. And they do that in a lot of the laundry detergents. I always get fragrance free like 7th generation laundry detergent. And when we travel or we go to the in-laws, they still get the regular crap. And it's amazing because again, I got 4 kids, right? So we're constantly doing laundry. And when we go to the in-laws and you use their regular standard American laundry detergent, it takes like literally 2 weeks of like constant, like at least 2 or 3 more cycles of fragrance free laundry detergent before all that smell is gone. And just the smell is a good indicator that you've got a lot of these estrogens in your laundry products. And they've even done dermal uptake studies where they put like clothing in, like these standard laundry products, and then they put them on people and you see blood levels go up. It's crazy, like you definitely can push your blood levels of these chemicals up. And then the argument is, well, but it's not problematic levels, right? They say, yeah, it pushes it up into your bloodstream, but the levels are still below the government's limits and this and that. But it's, at least people should know, right, that it is a source of exposure. If you've got 20 other sources of exposure, I would get away from it.
let's talk a little bit about food supply then, because that's another place where obviously a lot of us are exposed to different things. Estrogen in the food supply. I know you mentioned soy. I know you've talked about atrazine as a common
Right.
chemical that's sprayed on
Yeah.
crops and makes its way up through the food supply. What are the foods? What are the food sources that we have to be concerned about, assuming people may or may not be eating a carnivore diet? In general, where do you get the estrogens from, or the estrogenizing compounds, and how do you avoid those?
Yeah. Um, yeah, for sure. Soy, uh, lavender is also that's one of these plant products that's estrogenic, and there's continuously data. If you talk to the scientists that actually study that, they're really underwhelmed with lavender. So they call it an endocrine disruptor. Atrazine, I think, is one of the bigger ones. It's funny, the vegans like to show these studies with phthalates in chicken. For some reason, chickens have a lot of phthalates. I don't know if it's because of the plastic wrapping that they use, but I think it's more because they literally inject some kind of a, a cocktail into the chickens to like puff them up and make them plumper when they sell them. I've seen it. I've seen them do this. They have like a little hose they plug into the chicken and then they like blow it up and it makes it look a lot nicer. And that it's not just water that they're pumping in there. It's got like some salts and it's got some preservatives, including these estrogen chemicals. I mean, one of the chemicals is is parabens, right? Like methylparaben, propylparaben, butylparaben. And you can see it if you go and you look at the corn tortillas in your store and you look at the ingredients, you'll see methylparaben, propylparaben. You'll see all these parabens. It's in food and it's an estrogen, and oftentimes it's in personal care products, parabens. And the reason for that is it's bacteria hate that stuff because it's so bad for them. They know better than to eat that stuff. So it's preserving your food. It's preserving your chicken and stuff. I mean, at the end of the day, especially right now, people should really just get in good with their farmer, find one that's raising chicken. I mean, I get like 50 chickens at a time. I only buy them in the summer. I have 2 chest freezers. I freeze them, and I can go to the farm and I can look at the chickens, and they're out running around in the grass, eating bugs and all that. And they don't feed them any grain or any soy or anything. So like, and they're totally different. Like they're a lot darker meat. They're a lot smaller. You have to be okay with that. They're more expensive, but not crazy. I mean, I live in Minnesota, so everything's relatively cheap. I mean, they were selling pigs here the other day for $60, like a 300-pound pig, as long as you're willing to butcher it yourself. And for me, that's no big deal, right? I mean, last year I shot 7 deer. So I kind of live in my own little world, right? In Minnesota, we have unlimited zones where you can shoot unlimited amounts of deer. Wisconsin has the same thing. If you're really pressed for cash, now's the time to stock up, get a couple chest freezers and buy a cow from a farmer where you can actually see the cows out eating grass, and just cut that thing up yourself. It's not hard. Just basically cut up the stomach, pull out all the guts, and just, as long as you can kind of skin off the hide, just start cutting off meat. It doesn't really matter. I mean, you can make it as fancy or as redneck as you want, and you get better as you learn. But I mean, now is the time to buy a whole cow. But you got to find the farmer, I mean, that's the way to do it. This whole meat shortage, I think, there's definitely something fishy going on. I've talked to some of the farmers around here where they've been like contracting these sand pit operators, and they're like dumping pigs in there and just like covering them up with sand at these sand pits, these gravel pits out here. And then they're telling everybody there's this huge meat shortage, and like there's something fishy going on. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but like I say, now's the time to cash in on it if you want to stock up on healthy stuff, But yeah, I don't know that much more than that.
How do you just because most of us, when we freeze stuff, it's frozen in a plastic wrap or something like this. How do you deal with freezing your meat long term?
Yeah, good question. So when I went to Mississippi a couple weeks ago, I brought my freezer sealer thing. I get one of those freezer sealers, and it's plastic, but I actually bring the it's not wax paper, it's parchment paper. It's like silicone coated. And silicone, by the way, is perfectly fine. You can get silicone spatulas and all that. There's no leaching. I mean, unless they're putting some other nasty chemicals in there, which they usually don't. It'll say 100% silicone, and it's usually good. But yeah, I wrap the meat in silicone, this basically parchment paper. It's like butcher's paper. And then I put it in the plastic thing and vacuum seal it, suck out all the air, and it lasts forever. I mean, at least a couple of years probably, although I eat it. I try and shoot just enough deer so that me and my kids finish it by the end of the next fall, and then I shoot enough deer for the next. So the last 2 years I shot 5 deer, and then this year I shot 7 deer because the 5 wasn't quite cutting it, and I had to buy like half a cow. But the fish, what was interesting with Mississippi, I mean, one of the reasons I like to go down there and live down there, right, at my buddy's Airbnb place on the ocean, which nobody was staying at right now, so it's free. So I had to take advantage. But what I try and do is stock up on them, and then like, but the thing about fish, if you just put them in those freezer things and you air and make it airtight, you have to have so much water in there, it screws up your little machine. And then, at the end of the day, a lot of people just put fish in water and freeze it in Ziplocs, which is fine. But what's way better is if you freeze it a little bit first on like baking paper, parchment paper, whatever. You cut your fish fillets, you put it on the paper, you freeze it for like an hour or 2 hours just to make it a little frozen. Then you put in those vacuum seal things and suck out all the air, and it'll literally last 2 years, and it'll come out just as fresh as you caught it, just about. I mean, it's pretty impressive. So I'm kind of an expert in like gathering food, I guess, because this is the kind of stuff I do. And I think most people should try and do that stuff. It's really cheaper, it's healthier. I specifically try not to catch fish out of lakes that are muddy and nasty with all kinds of runoff, surrounded by these giant industrial ag fields that are just, you know, dumping chemicals. And and I try and find smaller fish. You know, like if I catch a 6-foot shark, I won't eat it. But if I catch like a 3-foot shark, I'll totally eat that. So things like that.
Yeah, it seems like, well, I mean, and that's good information. We should probably compile that and write it down, and so other people can mimic and duplicate those types of things and have a little bit of a, because some of these skills are lost on most people, and most people have just don't have experience with that, and maybe
Right.
how to butcher your own animal, how to source your own meat, how to preserve and do that stuff, and minimize the exposure to estrogens and other potentially problematic compounds, just to kind of secure the meat supply. I saw recently there's this article came out yesterday or today talking about the carbon cowboys. These are guys, Gabe Brown, Will Harris. These guys in regenerative, saying their business is booming right now. All the meat processors, the central meat processors, are having a hard time. So people like yourself who are, making lengths to cure their own meat, secure it, and take care of it, store it, are actually doing pretty well at this time. So
Right. The butchers are blown. Yeah, they're booked up for like months and months. Yeah. And it's easy. I did a YouTube video. It's like on my, I have 2 channels. One's like for scientific stuff, and it's just really technical. But then the other channel is just Anthony J Personal. And on there, I actually have a video of me butchering a deer and showing how easy it is. It's not the best editing because I do it myself, but I tried to shrink it down to like 10 minutes, and it's pretty clear on how you do it, and then you could do the same thing. I've shot multiple moose, I've shot bears, I've shot pronghorn. You can do the same exact thing on any animal. You could do it on a raccoon. It doesn't matter what the animal is. And once you learn the basic principle of like, here's how you get the guts out, here's how you take the skin off, here's where some of the best meat cuts are. You don't want to grind those up into burger, and ruin the best cuts of meat. And then everything else, grind up in burger, just start chopping.
yeah, do you have your own meat grinder too, Anthony? Or
Oh, for sure.
yeah.
Well, I don't know if you can see it, but like my food processor in the background, it's like over there, right there.
The red in the corner, yeah, the red thing.
Yeah. I mean, I have an attachment for that. That's a meat grinder. And then my mom actually has, they've got like a bigger industrial meat grinder thing. For some reason, I think it's because I used to use her food processor when I was younger, and and she hates it because it gets really hot when you run it at a high temp and you do like a whole deer. And so she bought like a Cabela's meat grinder that's more industrial. So, but I still use this one. I don't care. It gets a little hot.
It works. Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. And then you can put like liver in there and stuff. If you don't like liver, just throw it in with your burger. Make like an 80% or whatever, 95, whatever.
Do you make your own sausage too? Is that something you ever make sausage?
Sometimes, but not generally. That's probably the only thing. Actually, I just bought a pig recently, like a week ago, with this whole situation. And again, it's from a farmer I know and all this. And I had the whole thing basically turned into sausage and Polish sausage, breakfast sausage, like all the sausages and brats and all that. Yep.
Making me hungry. Haven't had my food yet for the day. But anyway, well, Anthony, this has flew by. We've gone through an hour. That's usually what we run these things at. Can you let folks know how to get a hold of you, how to find you, that type of stuff, where you're on social media?
Yeah, sure. I mean, Instagram is the one that I really actively sit on sometimes and go through. So Anthony GJ on Instagram, Jay is the last name. And then of course my AJ Consulting company. You have to actually add the word company. It's a terrible website name, but that's like my website that I actively, go through for consulting.
Well, let us know if we can be of assistance for getting you research subjects, if you got something that you think that will happen, because I think we are trying to support that. Obviously, the more research on this stuff that's actually done without a plant-based bias, I think would be very helpful.
Yeah, appreciate that. And you've already helped a lot, so I appreciate what you've done already.
Sure, and I continue to help with anything I can. So anyway, this is great. And thanks for what you do, Anthony. You guys have a good day. We'll see many of you guys tomorrow. And otherwise, have a good weekend. Stay safe. And is Minnesota opening back up, or are they one of the heavy lockdown states?
Yeah, no, on Monday, I think they're opening.
Good for you guys. Awesome. All right, guys. All right, guys. Take care. Thanks a bunch, everybody. We'll see you later. Okay. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.